Members of the fourth state, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this press conference. We, the members of parliament, from the refugee hosting communities in Garissa County, having hosted refugees for over 3 decades, and our people having shown great magnanimity and hospitality, would like to air our displeasure and anger on recent occurrences as relating to the conduct of the Principal Secretary for Immigration Services and the United Nations and the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. The Ushirika plan, which basically is the one of saying integrating the hosting communities and the refugees, currently being spearheaded by the Department of Refugees and UNHCR, is undertaken without any form of public participation and engagement with political leadership, local civil society organizations, the refugee hosting communities, the refugees themselves, and all other critical stakeholders as provided under Article 10 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. Instead, the department has at best been engaging itself occasionally with the county government of Garissa. This gross violation of the principle of the Constitution cannot be allowed to continue. We therefore demand for cessation of all talks being undertaken under the Shirika plan or the integration plan before substantive engagements is done with the refugee hosting communities as well as all the other stakeholders I mentioned. The Refugee Affairs Secretariat under the leadership of the Principal Secretary, Professor Bitok, is highly mismanaged and a den of nepotism and favorism. It is important to mention that 5 out of the 6 recently recruited Assistant Commissioners of Refugee Affairs hail from Professor Bitok's community. 5 out of 6. 5 are Kalenjins, 1 is from another community. That all the personnel in the department, save for 2, hail from other than the refugee hosting affairs, refugee hosting areas. Professor Bitok therefore runs DRS, the Department of Refugee Services, as a close-knit cartel of stooges. We therefore demand for immediate cancellation of all the recent recruitment spending and independent human resource audit by an independent government entity. As for UNHCR, we regret that UNHCR has taken for granted the generosity and magnanimity of the refugee hosting communities for the longest time, for hosting refugees in an ecologically fragile ecosystem that has left the area completely degraded and the environment destroyed. The refugees rely on energy and shelter from immediate environments. Thus, they have continually degraded our environment in search of fuel wood. All the wildlife that was there in the Dab and Fafi constituencies are gone. The refugees now are going all the way to 100 miles from the refugee camps themselves to go and get firewood. UNHCR has not provided any support to address this area. Less than 2%, usually allocated for energy provision, is far less than the needs of the refugees. Of the budget of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, less than 2% is allocated for energy. We find it bizarre that a UN agency that ought to espouse the highest standards of international environmental principles operates with wanton disregard to the refugee hosting areas' environment. The irresponsibility of the UN Refugee Agency has occasioned refugees to rely on firewood fetched from all over, as much as 100 kilometers, 100 miles in every direction. In the world where refugees use firewood as their source of energy, the Dab and Hagadera and what do you call Kakuma are the only refugee camps in the world where firewood is used for energy. In any other one, they are given ethanol, am I right? Sure. They're in any other, all over the world. Ethiopia, just next door here. Dolo. The refugees are not allowed to go and cut trees. The UNHCR supplies them with ethanol for their energy. The United Nations World Food Programme uses heavy trucks to transport goods to the Dadaab and has completely destroyed the road network and has led to areas being cut off from road transport during this El Nino period. Despite decades-long calls for tarmacking the Dadaab-Garissa road in order to sustainably address the perennial road network, WFP has not, and the other UN agencies, offered to undertake the most minor roadworks. Instead, they have worked towards exacerbating the already critical situation by putting huge and overloaded trucks on a poorly maintained roads that are not all-weather. Finally, during these trying times, when a severe drought is closely followed by flash floods occasioned by the onset of El Nino, UNHCR, which is the lead agency within the refugee camps complex, hasn't found it necessary to initiate an emergency response program to the refugee hosting communities of Fafi and Dadaab. We find it utterly unconscionable that UNHCR hasn't found it appropriate to trigger an emergency response to alleviate the loss of lives and the livelihoods for the refugee hosting communities as well as the refugees themselves in those areas we mentioned. We therefore urge that first, the government takes immediate steps to address the issues that we have now said in as far as the management of the Department of Refugee Affairs is concerned, or Refugee Services. For your information, out of 70 employees who work at the headquarters here for DRS, only 2 of them come from northern region. Not even from Dadaab and Fafi, but from northern region. Only 2. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees has got an office here, and I think they employ more than 2,000 people. You'll not find a single person. There's only one person that we know who works in the offices of UNHCR here, and that's my own son, and I have to declare that interest, who basically is one of the junior staffs. Nobody else comes from Dadaab, nobody else comes from Fafi, and hardly anybody comes even from Kakwa. The Turkanas are as marginalized as we are. Just the other day, Bitok employed 20 clerks, permanent clerks. None of them comes from the north. None of them comes from the refugee hosting areas. They are all split up between Kalenjins and other so-called shareholding communities of this government. So, we want to say, UNHCR, the community will not accept this any longer. We are telling the Kenya government, under none other than the president himself, move fast. Send in your own team to investigate these things and do the needful. I am sure, and we are all sure, the president has not given the green light to condone that kind of a discrimination which is being done on our people up there. The government, along with the UN bodies, have got to initiate also processes in the soonest possible way to make sure that the roads that have been destroyed over the years, that we get a tarmac road all the way from Garissa to the places we mentioned.